This is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to the show. Tommy, what are we doing today?
Today we're going to take a look at some of the greatest empires in history. So there's going to be a lot of debate going back and forth. Even what an empire is, that's even debated. But we're going to look at some of the most well-known or most influential empires that have ever existed.
For those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, Tom and I prepare for this separately. The first time we ever discuss any of our topics is right now. You're seeing it right now, so it's just a natural conversation. So we kind of don't know which one we're going to bring to the table. We don't even know how many we're going to have, but I'm sure we'll discuss some more length than others, and then there'll probably be some honorable mentions, and just for the fun of it.
I don't really talk to Pete until we do these podcasts. So that's what we
do. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of text in between. What do we do? What are we doing this time? But the one I want to start with may or may not be an empire at all. If it's considered an empire, it would be the longest running empire because it spans such a long time. But technically, only one portion of this was an empire out of the entire, I don't want to say reign of this civilization. It's more of a civilization and empire. And I'm talking about Egypt. During the New Kingdom era of Egypt, it was definitely an empire. Thutmose III was known as the Napoleon of Egypt at one point. He ran like 17 campaigns, pushes the border to Euphrates. During that time, the Middle Kingdom, you had Hatshepsut, which was the first female emperor, sent a lot of people more on peace missions, but also try to expand that empire. Akhenaten comes during this time, and he tries to create a monotheistic religion, which kind of backfires. And then you have Tutankhamun comes over, his son, to put it all back together. Then we have Ramses in 1270 something. I don't remember the years. I think it was 1274 maybe. It's the first battle in history that we have detailed tactical records for that survive from both sides. And this produces the first real surviving peace treaty that we have written down. Egypt has this period from about 1550 to about maybe 1000 BCE, where it, I would say, was an empire. It collapsed, obviously, because of invasions from the mysterious sea peoples, as they said, and drought and whatnot. But I mean, that would be my first one. No,
I mean, Egypt does a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like they give the world a lot of that, monumental, the agriculture and stuff like that, architecture, advanced mathematics, things like that. So they're doing a lot of things. I think most importantly would be like the irrigation systems, obviously the pyramids and the hieroglyphics. I get what you're saying about the empire, because were they really conquering? They conquered a lot of people in that area, but they weren't really going to other territories. Like you said, they talk about the sea people coming in. They weren't going back at the sea people and really trying to take over. But they faced a lot of invasions by other empires, like the Assyrians, I know, the Persians, obviously the Romans and Alexander the Great. Shout out to Macedonia, right? The real Macedonia.
Northern Macedonia.
Northern Macedonia. Okay. So, I mean, they definitely have a legacy. Egypt definitely has a legacy that shapes like the modern world today. Plus, there's always that fascination with ancient Egypt. Whenever, those exhibits come here and stuff like that. I remember going to one in New York City years ago, which they kind of lie about. I know I'm getting slightly off topic, but you go there and like, oh, here's Tutankhamun's like the mummy and stuff like that. It's actually not. Then you had only like one thing, it was like one toy was actually the actual stuff from everything else was the reproductions. The real stuff doesn't leave Egypt anymore. They kind of stopped sending out in like the 70s, I think. They were just like, no, we're keeping it all here. And they just send out like reproductions and stuff like that all over the world now. But yeah, it definitely has a lot of they definitely have a lasting legacy on things today. Again, could they be considered empire? I guess empire, maybe more of a kingdom, if anything
or
else.
Civilization, as I was saying. Yeah, perhaps just one of the early civilizations, obviously. But I was just at the Met a couple months ago, and there are mummies there. Egypt lasted so long.
I'm talking about
exactly, Tutankhamun. Yeah, but the Egyptian civilization lasted so long, people forget that we're actually to say that we today are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to the creation of the pyramids. Yes. Isn't that insane? That's how long that empire lasted.
Yeah.
So, but then anyway, the mummies at the Met are pretty cool. I took my kids. I mean, the kids, they're teenagers, but I'm like, gosh, check out. I think I was more excited than they were. They're like, oh, that's great, Dad. I'm like, no, it's a mummy. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you mentioned one that I want to talk about, and I'm not sure if it was on your list, but the Persian Empire, Cyrus and Xerxes. We have to, right? So let's get into that. What do you have about the Persians?
Well, obviously they were they were the empire back in
Yep.
the day, right? So they're definitely the one that was like dominating the world. Obviously, they have that famous conflict with the Greeks, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah, it
everything that
starts off
happened.
with 550. So it's all BCE. We're talking
Yeah, it's
550
all BC.
BCE
Like it
to
was founded
330.
by what, Cyrus the Great.
Yep.
And it fell base and it falls in 330 BC to Alexander the Great. He's the one that finally conquers the Persian Empire. And when he conquers Persia, he's pretty much like the conqueror of the world then at that point, right?
Yep.
So at its height, Persia stretched all they have like Egypt, Turkey, I know modern day Iraq, Iran, parts of Greece, Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of Central Asia. So they covered, I think they were saying around about 2 million square miles. So they were like, it was a big empire. About
Mostly population. Yeah.
45% of the world's
Yep.
population was controlled by the Persian Empire. So that's when you watch, if you ever watched a movie, 300, which is
Mhm.
not historically accurate. Okay, that was,
Mhm.
anything like that. Again, which was written by Herodotus, right? So you have all that information. That's why we kind of know about some of it. But they talk about, like that Xerxes. I think that was actually Xerxes. Was that Xerxes the first or Xerxes the second? Xerxes the
Yeah,
first.
I know it was Xerxes.
I think it
Might
was
have been the
Xerxes the
first.
first. I think it was the first. Like he stretched, like as far as the eye could see, like the sun never set. That's kind of what I know they say that later on about the British Empire. That was also the Persian Empire. The sun never sets on it because it was so vast,
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, what made this such a successful empire, because it does cover, like you said, a huge population, like 45% of the world's population. First, really true empire, I would say. And this is happening again, 550 to 330 BC.
Sure.
But at the same time, the reason why this is happening at that point is because of Cyrus the Great. I mean, Cyrus, as he's taking over, the Persian Empire was interesting in that he almost created a system on how to govern other regions
Yeah.
because he allowed people of those regions to retain their beliefs, to retain their religion, to
Yeah.
retain their
Local
customs,
customs. Yeah.
right? At the end of the day, that's why when you think about it for the Jews, he is the only foreign king that's praised in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Is
I got historians view him as an early champion of religious tolerance. That's what I kept on
Yep.
seeing popping up. And I was like, I don't know how much it was religious tolerance as much as it was he knew if you start persecuting people because of those things, they're going to rebel. There's going to be constant
Yeah.
rebellion. He's not interested in putting down these rebellions all the time. He wants to just conquer. All right, you're part of my
And
team now.
administer.
Yeah, and now I'm going to go conquer the people close to you. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
you want to be on the winning side, join my side. It's a model that like a lot of these conquerors do. Alexander the Great does the same thing. Like that's what these conquerors do. It's kind of like an assimilation. All right.
Yep.
But you can still keep your traditions, keep your customs. Some of them are going to be assimilated, right? There's some certain things are going to change. But they come in, they build roads, they standardize taxes and stuff like that.
Well, that's the
Divide
thing.
it
The
up
Royal
into-
Road,
Yeah.
1,700 miles. He connects essentially his empire is connected through economy, right? Coinage, right? Say one currency. It's like the EU before there's an EU. And at the time, you had the Assyrian Empire before the Persians kind of showed how this is done. The Assyrians would conquer and then take their people and move them around the whole, displace them as much as they could around the entire empire. And that kept people in check through fear.
Yeah.
But Cyrus was different. Cyrus was like, dude, you're going to pay me taxes. I'm going to bring you goods from another portion of my empire
that's
because of
another
these
thing.
roads I'm building and aqueducts and everything else. And you're essentially just going to be administered and pay, coinage to my empire, and nothing else changes for you.
Do
For
that
like,
because they were
okay.
making more money than they ever were before.
Yep.
Like, and you have all these goods, you're getting goods for the first time. That's what I think a lot of the students when we used to teach these didn't really fully understand. They're like, all right, oh, they got salt, who cares? Or they got sugar. This is new things that these people have never had before. You're living in a capitalist society. You can get something, you can order something from Amazon. It's there hours later if you really want to. Pay an extra $10 and a drone's going to drop it on your front step. Back then, if you wanted some of these things, you didn't even know what you wanted because you never even saw it before. So these new goods are coming in, they're getting wealthier than ever before. So it was a big thing. Even Xerxes, who's remembered for all his failures in Greece, he ruled the empire when it was its wealthiest. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't defeated and taken over by the Greeks. They just kind of stopped him from expanding. He wound up going on to doing fine.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely an empire, no doubt. What's another one you want to move to?
Oh, I mean, there's a whole bunch. I mean, let's move over a little bit into the Mesoamerica.
Okay, go.
All right. So one that kept on popping up for me when I was looking at it was actually the Aztec Empire, which again, they built cities bigger than London. These are huge, massive cities, and then they're kind of like wiped out within 2 years. So they get wiped out very, very quick. And they believe that the Aztec Empire was probably founded sometime around the 1420s, 1428, 1420. They just kind of debate. Modern day Mexico City, right? Like Tenochtitlan
Yeah, yeah.
was this like massive floating city. You've all seen the pictures in the books, all right? But it wasn't really a long lasting empire, I guess you can say, obviously, because Cortez comes in. So it lasted about 100 years, which is a good run. But compared to some of these other ones, that's probably why it doesn't get talked about quite as much.
Because again, it's fairly modern. It's
Yeah,
1428
yeah.
to
It's not, I mean,
1521.
it's when there's definitely a lot of recorded history about what's going on,
Yeah.
right? And it ruled over a lot of people, about, hundreds of cities, thousands of villages, about 6 million people. And unlike like some of the ones we'll talk about later, like Rome and Persia, the Aztecs did not govern every community directly. A lot of the conquered people paid tributes while keeping their local rulers. But the tribute is really what made them not well liked. The Aztecs were not one of those, like we're talking about, like Persian and Haqq was kind of well liked. Aztec, not so much.
No, well, because of the sacrifices. The sacrifices were
Yeah,
so bad that even the conquistadors, who were terrible, were
horrible.
shocked by them.
Yes,
Yeah, they
yes.
were like,
They were
"Whoa,
like, oh,
what
this
is
is
this?"
yeah,
And that's also that was an undoing for the Aztecs as well, because even based on what we know now, even their own subjects at the time during that reign of between 14 1500s, they didn't really like. That was a political weakness. The subjects did not like the sacrifice aspect of the religion.
no.
Um,
And that's the
but
reason why
again,
they all sided with the Spanish. They saw the Spanish, at least at first, as liberators, not as conquerors. Now that changed very quickly. All
yeah.
right, I want to say they were like, "Oh yeah, the Spanish were great. We like that Cortez came here." That changed very, very quickly.
And obviously, we say that the Aztecs are brought down by the conquistadors, but really they're brought down by
But
the
this
diseases that are brought in. I mean, smallpox in 1520
decimated.
kills 40% of the population just with 1 year.
They were advanced. They had iron tools. They used wheel transportation. They were like advanced for that time. Obviously, like they had one of the largest cities, had huge agriculture and everything. It's just Spain defeats the Aztecs. That's not really like that's only part of the story. There's so much more that goes through this with the allies, the disease. We can actually look at that later on if you ever do want to, just like the fall of empires and stuff like that.
If you're staying on this side, you got to look at the Incas. The Incas are, moving on from the Aztecs, largest
Large,
pre-Columbian empire um,
and they did it
in
without wheels, iron,
America.
or
That's what the
written on.
crazy thing. Yeah,
Yeah, they
I
did all
saw
this
that.
even before. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what they were saying. It's like it was one of the greatest administrative empires, but they didn't have a written language.
And it was kind of the same time span. They were like 1438 or something like that.
Yeah.
They're just in a different part. They're in modern day like Peru.
But what's crazy about this one is the fact that they were able to create this empire running about 2,500 miles down the Pacific coast. Their empire was built into mountains. Like
Yeah.
this shouldn't have been possible. What they were able to
Yes, they did.
establish.
Yeah, I know I kept on saying, but they didn't have rolls. They didn't have iron. Like they didn't have iron weapons
Yeah.
and tools. They didn't even use wheel transportation really. But they're able to build all these, massive things, massive cities.
Anyway, the fall begins really with Francisco Pizarro, and it's very
It's the same
similar
thing.
to what happens with
You see it all because, well, it's that they're introduced to new diseases they had no immunity for. The Spanish had gunpowder. That's going to change things.
yeah,
And
nuts.
they wind up falling after that. Yeah, but they just can't like keep it going. Basically, it's just too much. The forces come in with too much, especially when their population is dwindling because of the disease.
Yep. I think we should just get this one out of the way and go backwards to the one that really is the cornerstone of Western civilization. You have to talk about the Roman Empire.
They argue that the Roman Empire still rules the modern world because it's like still it's so influential. July and August, the months, you know what I mean? You have all these things. We watch sporting events in the stadium. We vote in a republic. We walk into a courthouse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All these
An established system of laws, a
Yeah,
uniform system of laws.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, so much stuff here. But interesting is the Romans borrowed a lot of stuff from the Greeks. So, which is ironic because the Romans borrow, we'll use the word borrow, things from the Greeks, and then the Roman Empire splinters into two, and the East goes back to Greece, and Greek, traditions becomes, Byzantine Empire. So it's like they start off with the Greeks, they end with the Greeks. But Roman Empire, guys, Roman Empire tore itself apart through various different civil wars. Caesar versus Pompey, then you have Octavian versus Antony. But ultimately, the empire is truly established, I would say, when Octavian takes over, right? Wouldn't you say that at that point you have the Pax Romana, which is the time of peace for about 200 years, and 117, 5 million square kilometers from Scotland to Mesopotamia. Um, they say about a fifth of humanity was under Roman power at that time.
Yeah, like
Oh,
50 million people. So it was huge. Yeah.
yeah, definitely a huge Roman Empire, and that became one of its downfalls, is the fact that they became too big to
Well, it
administer.
just became too big. But like that, you've heard of like all roads lead to Rome. That wasn't just a figure of speech, it was true.
Yep.
Right. So you find the road, you just kept on following, you could eventually ruin. That's why they're just getting constant. It wasn't like one battle that really ruined Rome, if you want to talk about it that way. We'll talk more about what they were before we talk about how they went down, but it just, constant attacks, basically. Yep. But like the Roman military was so like well trained and everything too, but they weren't just a military, they're also like an engineering corps. They laid siege to cities, but they also built roads, constructed bridges. They built forts a lot of times overnight. Like you would wake up and there'd be like a Roman fort down the road, and be like, oh great, now that's going to be like their base operations. They're going to start invading. They paid their soldiers, they paid them well. So it's all basically, they had that structure in place to really, for expansion, and that's what it was.
Yeah. Also things we get from it to this day. I mean, you mentioned some of them, but the European civil law system, obviously, for one, the languages, right, that stem from Latin, the French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, so on. The Catholic Church, interestingly, gets its administrative structure really from Rome, which is also ironic because the Christians are persecuted, and then it became the state religion. Most of the cities in Europe were built in a model of Rome. They wanted to be physically looking like Rome. Concrete. That's one of the greatest inventions of all time.
Well, the Pantheon still has the largest unreinforced concrete dome to this day. Yep.
Through all of that, they eventually, winds up falling. So Diocletian's idea was like, well, it got too big to govern just from Rome. So he splits the empire into the west and the east. And the east is actually wealthier. The Greek portion of the empire is wealthier. That's where everybody kind of wants to go, right? That's where Constantine moves the capital to Byzantium and then renames it Constantinople, because the major port city, a lot more wealth there. And when it does that and moves the headquarters of the Roman Empire to the eastern half in Byzantium in 330, that's pretty much the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. Rome's abandoned. They said there was pigs and animals walking around the streets. It was just kind of let go, while Constantine makes the east and Constantinople the main headquarters of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, when they split up like that too, they did it because it was hard to govern, but now it made like unified defense like impossible.
Yeah,
so that's another reason. Then you're getting constant attacks by the Goths, the Vandals, the Huns. They depend a lot on slave labor, so that strains the economy. If you're not like expanding and getting more slaves, that's going to be a problem. Heavy taxation and stuff like that. And they had a constant like new emperors every couple of years. They got weaker. Their central authority just became too weak.
Well, I think it's natural to just jump into the Byzantine Empire, because that's essentially what winds up happening, right? The eastern portion, Roman Empire falls as we know it. The Eastern Empire reemerges, kind of like a phoenix, you might say, and becomes the Byzantine Empire, which is one of the longest empires. That lasts from 330 to 1430s.
So a lot of people say like it's the empire that refused to die.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people think that it fell like 1,000 years before it even did. You know what I mean? It wasn't gone. It just moved east for another 1,000 years. So it is still the Roman Empire. All right. It's just kind of overlooked a lot of times.
Yeah. It's a renamed Roman Empire. It's a rebranded. They rebranded.
Yeah, they rebranded it. Yes. It's Spider-Man Brand New Day.
Yes. And they also came out. I didn't see it. You saw it, obviously.
I saw it last night. It was pretty good.
I knew you were going to see it. I mean, my kids saw it. I didn't see it yet. But longest continuously running empire in Western history, period. It was almost like the buffer between expanding Islamic religion, because Constantinople being Christian and the Byzantine Empire being Christian, and it was like the defense of, you might say, Western Europe against Islam spreading as a new religion
into Europe.
Into Europe.
Justinian the First, he's got considered the greatest emperor of it. He kind of reconquered much of the old Western Empire, right? Reformed Roman law. He's really looked at as one of history's greatest rulers, because he kind of not only stabilizes, but then it expands his Byzantine Empire further. And then it locks in those traditions. Locks in a lot of those Roman traditions, particularly their law, into place, which then allows that to kind of extend to all of Europe, which becomes the basis for, Western civilization, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, he consolidates laws too, because when he's doing this, Roman and Greek empire, there's Alexandria as well. There's so much wealth and knowledge. And the empires of prior, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans have spanned such a long time that every few, we're talking thousands of years, laws have been made over thousands of years. And now you're almost like, well, which law is the right law? Like, where do I, like, do I listen to this
Yeah,
law from 100 years ago or the one from 2000 years ago? It was still Rome. So what he does is he codifies all the laws and he consolidates them. And
yeah.
that becomes, it's
These
almost
are going to
like,
be our laws now. Yeah,
exactly. And by doing that, he takes essentially what is considered Western civilization up to that point and creates like a for dummies version, which becomes the basis of Western law, really.
it's big. And one reason they were super successful too is they had they called it Greek fire, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure people have heard of this
Yeah, yeah,
before. It was a big thing because it could burn on water. And this is what really saved them for a whole bunch of sieges over the course of like their history. They'd be attacked, and because they had this Greek fire, which no one knows the exact formula, but it's probably similar to like napalm. But it was kind of the medieval equivalent of like a super weapon because they could shoot on the ships and it would just burn them in the harbors and stuff like that. They would put in pots, throw it, and because since it could burn on water, you could sink the invasion fleets before they ever came. And it was like feared in this time span that, the Byzantines had this Greek fire. And it was really their like super weapon that kept them in position as long as they did.
And what's ironic about this one is that the Fourth Crusade is what essentially sacks Constantinople in 1204, and that becomes like the beginning of the end. After that, you have, which is again crazy. The Crusades were supposed to go and help, but they didn't. And after that, you have the Ottomans just nibble away, nibble away, nibble away until Mehmed II arrives with 80,000 men and the infamous humongous cannons and essentially destroys the city of Constantinople. It falls on May 29th, 1453, I think. And that is pretty much the end of the Byzantine Empire.
Suppose the last emperor died defending the city off these, heavy sieges and stuff like that. But yeah, it marks kind of the end of the Middle Ages at that point in 1453. But they were big because they also preserved a lot of Greek and Roman texts from earlier on. They kind of kept those. So that they're used later on by scholars, and so that early works like Plato were all saved by the Byzantine Empire during that time.
Yeah. And the Ottoman Empire, we did an episode on this years ago, but the Ottoman Empire again naturally follows in, and I know we skipped a bunch here because we're not really doing chronological, but since we're at the Ottoman lasted forever. It's 1299 to 1922.
Yeah, and World War One.
Yes, isn't that crazy? Right?
Yeah.
It's like starts with the Fourth Crusade and ends with World War One.
Now they weren't what they were at that point, but they were still
yeah.
They still like that connection, the unbroken chain is still there.
Yep. At 600 plus years, considered one of the longest lived empires in history. It straddles the medieval to the modern, like in a way that no other empire does.
Large territory: Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Syria,
North Africa, Western Arabian Peninsula,
North Africa, parts of Saudi Arabia. I think Serbia, Romania, Hungary.
Yeah.
So it's about 2 million square miles, probably about like 35 million people. So it was a vast area at its peak.
Yep,
definitely.
Also known to grant significant self-governance to various people and religions under them. Eventually, what winds up happening is becomes known as the sick man of Europe because it slowly becomes a nation, or I should say an empire on a decline.
I think that model, like a lot of the teachers in my district, they do something like when they introduce empires called the recipe of an empire, where they're like seeing what works and everything, what doesn't, and then that's what you put an empire, make sure you have control, you have roads, you have infrastructure, all that stuff, and that works for a while. But like anything else, I think, particularly when you get to like the 19th century, 20th century, a lot of these things aren't working anymore. People have more of this idealized, what they see what's going on in Europe, where they have the countries and it's more centralized control, right? You have more identity. So a lot of these places that were vast, like these empires, those little entities that used to be content with just being like, yeah, we'll just go along with it. You're in control, whatever. Now they're starting to rise up. Now they know we want our own country just for this group of people and all that. You get what I'm saying? So you start getting that, and that it's harder to have that kind of like just without that central command. It's very difficult. And that's why Ottoman Empire is called that old sick man of Europe, is because they're just constantly dealing with these uprisings, constantly dealing with these, they just can't control their own people because the empire is so vast.
Yep. Eventually there's a Turkish War of Independence, 1920, 21. Well, actually I think it's like 19 19. It's right after World War I. And that's what leads to the end of the Ottoman Empire as we know it, and the creation and declaration of the Republic of Turkey in 1923.
Constantinople becomes Istanbul, like one of the
Yep.
great capitals of the world.
Yep.
Not much later on, but yeah.
Yeah, I would love to visit one day, maybe, perhaps. What's another empire? I mean, I have the Mongol Empire. I mean, that's something we should talk about.
Oh yeah,
You
they're
got the
definitely
Mongols?
Mongols. Yeah, the Mongols.
All right. I also have the Han Dynasty, China. We could go back to that too. But the Mongols are interesting because obviously Genghis Khan is a figure that is infamous in history, but it's really how quickly they became an empire. That's the
It's so
key here.
vast, right?
Yeah.
Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. That's
Yeah.
huge.
Well, it's because of horses and, speed and ruthlessness. I mean, it's not one thing, but when Khan takes over, there's a lot of fractions within various steppe tribes, and he kind of consolidates them and takes them on this war path. Genghis Khan.
It's the largest continuous land empire, right?
Yes, in human
So
history.
it's 9 million square miles, basically over 100 million people.
Yeah.
We're in this like Korea, China, Mongolia, Russia, Persia, Ukraine. I think it's all this area. And what I think that I read somewhere, I forget what it was, exact number was, but like a lot of people in that area have like a direct lineage to Genghis Khan.
Oh yeah.
Percentage actually has like
of some percentage of men have his
have
chromosome.
Genghis Khan DNA, like because
Yeah.
they're actually his like ancestor. Because he did, the pillages and
Well,
basically.
and not just pillaging, but also what's interesting, talking about a long-term effect, the Black Death of 1347 arrives in Europe via Mongol trade routes. You know what I mean? Like that they create. Oh my goodness, there's so much here.
Well, no, we can just do stuff on their cavalry. Like their cavalry force is considered the greatest in history, and it's still like looked at how they always fought battles on their terms and never fought like an enemy's battle. So you're looking at like art of war and stuff like that. Like Genghis Khan obviously is like was very effective.
They killed 40 million people during their conquest, which was considered about 10% of the world's population at the time.
Yeah, they just would surround you and annihilate every living thing in that death circle, whatever you wanted to call it, was dead. They would just constantly, move in slower and slower and slower until the last kill was reserved for Genghis Khan or whoever the Khan was at the time. They would come in, kill the last living thing. It wasn't just like people; it was everything.
Yeah,
nothing survived.
I just looked it up. It was 1 in 200 men worldwide. So about 60 million people carry the chromosome lineage from Genghis Khan.
Yeah, that's obviously a lasting legacy.
1 in 200 men worldwide. It's connected genetically to Genghis Khan. That's kind of crazy. That was a 2003 study.
Yeah.
Also made
23andMe or whatever it is.
Yeah. Also made famous by Marco Polo. He's kind of the guy that like gives it, I guess the cultural significance as well. Okay, what else? Oh, what's another one we got here?
One that kept on popping up with me, and I figure this one is probably not talked about, but it's definitely was an empire, and it was a very quickly modernized empire. Probably the fastest history was the Empire of Japan. So obviously their timeline was founded in like 1868, which is more modern than a lot of these other ones I talk about. I get it, with the Meiji Restoration. Its peak was in 1942, 43, and then it's gone in 45. So they already were around for like 77 years. But when you look at like geographical size, they spanned they have over 400 people live within Japanese controlled territory. Japan,
Crazy.
Korea, Taiwan, Manchuria, parts of China, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia. And it was because they saw what was happening in China and they didn't want it to happen to them. So Japan's mostly isolated in the world before 1853. And then obviously Matthew Perry arrives with pressure to open up ports. And then they just figured like we need to start to modernize or we're going to be conquered, like what they saw happening to a lot of their neighbors. So this Meiji Restoration, basically they rapidly adopt railroads, modern factories, public education, Western style military. You ever see that movie with Tom Cruise? What's it called? The Last Samurai.
That's
Not really,
right,
again, historically accurate, but that takes place during that time where you're kind of seeing this type of this shift, this change. They actually end samurai rule. They kind of bring it back as kind of like a prestige thing, but it kind of shifts everything into this. And they still have that the emperor is a god on earth, right? Emperor Hirohito was considered god on earth. But they're doing all this and they industrialize very, very quickly. And then because they're industrialized, they don't have the materials. They have to go conquest. And that's what they're starting to do. Remember, they beat Russia in a war in 1904, which is huge. It shocked the world. It's the first time.
In such a short time that they were able to build that empire to that point.
It's the first time in the modern era that an Asian nation defeated a major European power. And it changed all global perceptions.
they did it so quickly.
Yeah, 77 years. Well,
Yeah,
50 years they were a global power.
yeah, which is insane. But I love the fact that when they started, they like send out, emissaries and other people around the world to learn the best from every possible empire.
Yeah, they
So
got
they're
like the
like,
factories from like the United States. They got like British naval officers. They got like
exactly,
German
German
military.
army. Yep.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
like, send everyone up to all these other empires and find out what works best. So we'll make our own system. So for Britain, like I said, they borrowed the navy. They borrowed the things that worked best in each empire and created their own, together, which is
You saw
what
that, yeah.
made it really, really cool. Well, cool for them,
So
not cool for
Japan
China.
still depends on empire today, but they're a major global leader, especially when it comes to like
Yeah.
electronics, robotics. You know what I mean?
Yep. 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 So let's go into China. We're going really back 200 BC to about 200 CE, and that would be the Han Dynasty. Essentially, what we're looking at here is they were Rome's contemporary. A lot of people don't realize that, but while Rome is doing their thing in Europe, the Han Dynasty is doing its thing in Asia.
Yeah, I would say Han is probably it influenced more people today than even Rome. You can make
Yeah, I
that
would
argument.
make that argument, right?
This is the dynasty that made China as we know it.
Yeah. Emperor Wu sent Zhang Qian to Central Asia in 138, and that really starts this Silk Road. The Silk Road begins during this time, which is what becomes the claim to fame of the Han Dynasty. It will run for 1,500 years afterwards, after this is opened during this time. And it transfers everything: gunpowder, religion, Buddhism, right? Plague.
It's like Augustus Caesar of the East. That's how
Exactly.
a lot of people. He promoted Confucianism, right? That was a major foundation of government, strings the military. Officials were selected based on their knowledge, education, ability. So it wasn't just that like predestined stuff. You still have that hierarchy, but like you didn't have that. You were born into a role, and that's what you're going to be. No, if you're smart enough, you're going to do it.
I saw a statistic that 92% of Chinese people today still call themselves the Han. Like, that's the identity that they still take from
relate to,
from that point. Yeah. So anyway, it was kind of cool. Han, I saw that the Han aristocrats. Did you see this? Like, fun fact. Well, all always buried in full body armor, made of like hundreds of these jade, sewn together gold and jade diamonds and whatnot. One guy was found with like 2,400 little diamonds sewn into his clothing when he was buried. Kind of intense.
I just find it interesting that like the two were like around the same time, but they never really had like direct
interactions per se. Yeah,
there was all indirect, obviously with trade.
Through Silk Road and trade. Yeah, and merchants.
But they never had any sort of like, and they knew about each other.
Yeah,
but they never like had any sort of like, obviously not even like trade contacts or obviously military campaigns against each other. Like this is one of those history what ifs. What if they did decide to like anything, like if they interacted, how things could have been different, how it could have shaped everything. They're definitely one of the most important ones. They're like they're top 5.
Yep. The two I have left that I have like 4 left, but 2 that we have to talk about. At least one of them is the British Empire. But before the British Empire, you also have the Spanish Empire, which began before the British Empire. But then again, same thing. It like wobbled its way to its official demise, which was embarrassing for them at the hands of the United States, which was new kid in town, basically, as far as imperialism was concerned.
That's their end begins. So you can make that argument.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to.
So I guess we could start with the Spanish Empire before we get to the British. Spanish Empire is considered to be an empire from late 1400s until Spanish American War, 1898. The first there was the first empire that said that the empire the sun never sets on. It was actually the Spanish Empire before it was a British Empire. First truly global empire because of its territorial expansion
in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Europe. So it's like basically, major continents. It's got influence there. So like Africa had like a lot of the coastal territories. Asia had the Philippines and Guam. And America had Mexico, Central America, Florida, right? Even parts of the American Southwest, California, were all under Spanish control at this time. And in Europe, obviously Spain, southern Italy, I believe, even the Netherlands at times, and in parts of Belgium. So it was vast.
Well, that's all because Charles V. Charles V is like he's like the main guy here, main character, really. And he's doing all this like 300 years before England does it, where he thinks he creates a colonial empire. That's essentially what this is. Um, that's where you have this idea of sponsoring all of these, not conquistadors, but Spain, I guess, yeah, conquistadors naturally, but sponsoring all of these excursions, right, to the New World to find all this stuff.
Yeah, they create the Columbian Exchange,
Literally, the Columbian Exchange.
right?
Yeah, I was going to
So
go with that.
from the Americas that comes into Europe, you have things like potatoes. Like if you really think about a lot of Europe, if you look at European cuisine, a lot of it's all based on potatoes. Yeah, it didn't even exist prior to the Columbian Exchange there. Right?
Yeah,
So you have
came from
potatoes,
Peru.
tomatoes, corn, yeah, chocolate, peanuts. Obviously, tobacco becomes major, and then they're bringing things in from Europe like horses and cattle. Those things
Yeah,
didn't exist. Now you think of like the Midwest United States, you think of horses and cattle, wheat.
yeah.
You know what I mean? All these things come in, obviously get diseases too.
The end of this empire, a few things. I mean, obviously, there's a defeat of the Spanish Armada by the British, which is what basically signals like you're no longer the first-rate empire.
Other empires started bringing in. They used to bring all these treasure ships over, like gold and
Yeah,
silver, right across the Atlantic. And then when other silver started coming in from other empires, like Spain, like Britain, yeah, like you said, starts making their own empire. You have all this like silver coming in. It kind of weakened Spain's economy, kind of like brought prices. So
well, also the interesting thing is England made a lot of money stealing
yeah,
their stuff. They the pirates, right? I mean, you have Britain sanctioned legal pirates to essentially like Drake, Francis Drake, to steal the Spanish gold that was coming over. And but because also the issue is that Spain became so wealthy and brought so much gold over from the Americas to the old world that it actually caused inflation, massive inflation,
yeah.
because they were bringing so much stuff over. And then England's like, you know what, those guys are getting stuff from over there. We're going to get stuff from over there too. And it almost like you might say the Spanish Empire, um, I don't want to say it completely inspires the British Empire, but definitely has a role in that. After the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1700s, eventually Napoleon invades in early 1800s, which is the beginning of the end for them, because when Napoleon invades Spain, then all of their colonies in South America are like, oh, this is a good idea and a good time to
And
become.
they start breaking away, and they can't do anything. They try to keep them.
Yep.
And they keep a couple, and then obviously you have the Spanish-American War in 1898.
That was
When
the end of
Spain
that.
loses what, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, they're kind of
Yep.
just done. But
Yeah,
they still
they're
have a
done as
legacy.
a
Like,
world power.
more than 500 million people speak Spanish today, right?
Yeah.
And they spread Catholicism all over the world, particularly Latin America and the Philippines.
Yep. No, so definitely, definitely important. It's interesting because the next one is British, and also how many people speak English around the world, right? The British Empire
Oh yeah,
is probably the last big empire. It is, right? Contemporary speaking,
yeah,
right? Most recent empire. You can make
it
the
depends
argument that's an empire, but
yeah. That's where I would say, and when we'll get to that, like what's considered an empire, because you do
yeah.
look, a lot of historians now are considering, the United States an empire because of the colonies and the overseas. But we'll get to that in a second, I guess.
So let's do the British Empire, right? It really starts with Elizabeth, Elizabeth and her sea captains, like I mentioned. Drake, they explore and privateer in the late 1500s. Great Britain really doesn't become an empire truly until the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War, right? I mean, that's when it defeats France. So everyone kind of knows this and remembers this from school, but the French were an empire, the British were an empire, the Spanish were an empire. These are all empires that are vying for getting something out of this new world. And ultimately, the one that becomes the most successful out of those is the British Empire. But the reason why they are managing to get all of these colonies, because as we know, their colonies, if you were to paint everything in red that belonged to Britain, and England,
The world map would look red. Right?
yeah, they said a quarter of the world was
the world, one quarter of the
land.
world's population, and they control the oceans, which is really crazy to look at it. They're like this tiny island, and yet they're controlling everything, particularly because they control the Navy. It shows the importance of like having like a naval power.
Yeah. Well, that was the Navy was their thing. I mean,
Yeah,
but then
that's what they were.
but then they would use what really blew them up is the economy, because the Industrial Revolution starts in England because they could use raw materials from their colonies that they accumulate over the years,
build all these things, to
and
industrialize,
then sell those products to those same places.
and they connect their empire through the oceans and with their Navy, and that's why they were able to expand so much further than like the Mongols, which was all land, but they never went across water.
Yeah, and these guys did. The key is a navy that protects the empire, um, and that's why the key was always like World War One partially starts because of the fact that England feels threatened that Germany's building up their navy. It's like, wait,
Yeah,
no, 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 like you can't do
that's
that.
our
Like,
job.
I feel like that was the beginning of the end for them too, because World War
That's the
One and World
crown
War
jewel.
Two,
Yeah, yeah.
it definitely bankrupt them as an empire. They're
That's right.
bankrupt.
They were bankrupt after that, and then it officially ends in '97 when they give up Hong Kong.
Yeah,
I believe that's when they.
they
But
said it was like a
yeah,
symbolic. Yeah,
symbolic at that point. Yeah, it wasn't
yeah,
anything there. But India was Britain's most valuable colony
yeah,
mostly because of like cotton, tea, and they provided a lot of soldiers
yeah.
and a marketplace for British goods. Kind of what the original 13 colonies were, right, in North America.
Supposed to, yeah.
That's what they were, but it just never really got to that because the Americans were like, no, we're gonna fight you, craziness. And but so then they just turned over to India. They were able to do what they wanted to do in North America. They were able to do in India.
Yeah, and yeah, India independence 47 was like it was like the last. That's the first page of the last chapter of the British Empire. After that, you have the decolonization of Africa one by one by one. And what really kind of shows the pinnacle of the last chapter of the British Empire was the Suez Canal crisis, which basically shows America comes in and says, "Get out! No, 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 you're not the boss here. Like we determine the world events going forward." And that was kind of a humbling experience for the British Empire. And yeah, the symbolic closure is 1997. But yeah, but also like think about it. Why so many people in the world speak English is because this navy and really the commerce that this navy protected expanded to every corner, if there's no corners obviously, but every area of the modern world.
Right. There was British English speaking people on every single continent, including the Arctic ones. There were people everywhere.
Yeah. Imagine what would have happened if Napoleon was ever successful in taking over Britain when he was at his peak.
We would have to speak French. Forget that.
I guess, right? I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any honorable mentions? Or I guess United States would be the
United States first for the other one. It's probably it kept on coming this phrase off a lot of times when I was researching it, like the most powerful empire without calling itself an empire. Even though other people would probably call it an empire, and I can understand that. It definitely can make that argument very easily. But that doesn't rule colonies like Britain. Its military spans the globe. Its currency powers international trade. Its movies, its music, technology reach every country. So is America an empire? It's very influential.
And if you look at the definition of it, I mean, we do have territorial expansion through conquest. We literally started that on this continent and moved forward. So, like, you have to put check in that box.
Yeah.
Do we have formal overseas colonies? Yeah. I mean, they're not called colonies, but like, Puerto Rico, Philippines, Cuba. I mean, technically not anymore, but you could put a check in there. At some point, we had overseas colonies. We have about 750 military bases in 80 countries around the world. So when you're talking about a military footprint, check, right? And economic and cultural dominance, like you said, I mean, things flow from us, and not to sound like America, but
but it's part of it. Like American projects power globally. Like we don't conquer these territories like traditionally, but we conquer them maybe economically, like businessly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They annex all these territories that way.
Yeah. Also, you have this idea of regime changes, which literally just happened. Like this is what we do. Interventions and regime changes. U.S. I mean, numerous. Iran, Guatemala, Congo, Brazil, Chile, Honduras, Nicaragua, Libya. I mean, that's kind of what we do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Canada's next. I mean, that's what happens.
Oh no, that's not even funny. But
I like Canada.
Yeah, I know. But no emperor, no imperialist ideology. That's not what drives us. You might say that. We granted independence to a lot of these regions. So there's a lot of decolonization instead of consolidation, you might say.
We do try to spread our ideals, right? Democracy, capitalism. We established the United Nations, NATO, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. All of these things are put in place basically after World War II, which is when our dominance really comes into play.
And we have no settler colonies as opposed to all these other empires that we mentioned today.
Yeah.
It's not like we went and settled and took over areas in that way. I think modern historians would look at this question of whether the United States is an empire as the answer would probably be like complicated.
Yeah,
It's
well,
complicated.
it's called an informal empire. Like they
Huh.
say, the old term empire doesn't really fit the modern United States, but it does check off all those boxes, and we definitely have that extreme influence. That's why they don't really say an empire; it's more of a superpower, and then I think that kind of fits these sorts of
It's
things.
like a modern imperial system that doesn't fit the classical model of an empire.
Yes.
Boom. Okay. Sounds good. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't have any other empire. I mean, there's so many empires. Okay, guys.
There's
Yes,
so many other ones.
we
that
missed a
would-
lot of empires. But we wanted to talk about some of the big ones, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's so many other ones that we could have like got over that. But I know people can go, what about this one? What about that one?
Yeah.
You know, we didn't really talk about the French colonial empire all that much. Portuguese empire, they're over there rivaling, you know, Spain back there, the Russian Empire. Okay, you have like the Abbasid
The Russian
Empire.
Empire, yeah, the Tsars,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like there's so many others that did exist. I know we talked about briefly about the Assyrians. There's a lot of out there. You know, we're just kind of looking at the top 10,
We're just
top whatever
chatting.
we really,
Yeah.
just chatting, just making a dialogue here. I don't want anyone from like the Assyrian Empire getting all worked up. Let us know.
Let us know. So, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already found us. Make sure you click that subscribe button. Let your friends know. If you're listening to this, make sure you go and find us on YouTube and also click that subscribe button. And you could, best way to contact us is through Facebook. You could just search History Teachers Talking podcast on Facebook. You could message us there, and you can, suggest anything you might want us to chit chat about. And I think that's pretty much it. So I, hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
Boom.